I kept the tide gauge because nobody else wanted the job, and because the man before me, a quiet old Brazilian named Dorner, had scratched 11 marks into the pylon over 30 years, and asked me, on the last day I saw him alive, to keep the count going after he was gone. The pylon stood at the seaward edge of Halprin Dock, a human supply station leased onto the coast of a world the locals called Vethis, under a sky the color of a bruise healing. The marks ran up the iron in a crooked ladder, each one a knife cut at the high water line of a storm Dorner had lived through. 10 marks in 30 years. The 11th was the worst one he ever saw, cut the week before he retired, the year a swell came in under a clear sky and nearly took the fuel barges with it. Dorner used to say the marks were the only thing on Vethis that never lied to him. He'd spent 30 years listening to the surveyor cast explain away every strange swell with a calm footnote about thermal drift or distant seismic shudder, and 30 years cutting a fresh line into the iron whenever the water proved them wrong. He never argued with them in their own language, the language of projections and confidence intervals. He just kept cutting marks, patient as the tide itself, and let the pylon do the arguing for him. I'd watched him do it twice before he retired, and both times the surveyors had eventually come around, slow and grudging, the way ice gives way to a river it can't hold back forever. I never thought I'd see a 12th. The morning it happened, the sky was clean as a polished plate. No wind worth mentioning. The Vethi harbor clerks, surveyor cast, the clinical sort, all measured voices and instruments they trusted more than their own eyes, had the tide tables posted on the board same as always, low and unremarkable. I checked the gauge at first light out of habit. The way you check a stove is off, even when you know it is. The water was a hand's width below Dorner's 11th mark, and climbing. I watched it for 40 minutes before I believed what I was seeing, because believing it meant something. I watched it cross the 11th mark at 6 minutes past 7, on a day with no storm, no wind, no reason at all. I wrote the time in my log in pencil, the way Dorner taught me, because pencil doesn't lie about being changed later. I walked it up to the clerk's office myself. The surveyor on duty, a tall, pale gray creature named Osun with calm, slot-pupiled eyes, listened to me with the patience of someone listening to a child explain a nightmare. "Your gauge has drifted," Osun said. "Our instruments show normal tide. We recalibrate human equipment quarterly. It has been 3 months." "It's not the gauge," I said. "It's the water." "The water," Osun said, "does not exceed projections without cause, and there is no cause logged." He said it the way you'd say 2 and 2 are 4, like the saying of it settled the matter for good. I thought about telling him what Dorner had told me, that the marks didn't care what the projections said, but I'd learned by then that arguing philosophy with a surveyor was like arguing with a closed door. You don't win the door over, you just find another way through, or you wait for the door to open on its own. I thanked him for his time, the way you thank a man who has just wasted it, and went back down to the water. I went back down to the dock anyway, because the gauge had never lied to Dorner in 30 years, and I didn't see why it would start lying to me. I logged the climb every 20 minutes after that, in pencil, my own hand getting tighter each time. By midday, the water had gone 2 hands above the 11th mark, which meant it had gone higher than anything in the 30 years of marks on that pylon, on a day that should have been the calmest of the month. That was when I saw the light under the water. It came up slow, a pale green wash spreading beneath the surface like something dissolving from the inside, and I thought at first it was algae catching the sun wrong. Then it pulsed, evenly, like a heartbeat too large to belong to anything that should be near a dock full of fuel barges and net tenders, and children who like to fish off the south rail after their lessons. I did not run. I want to say that plainly, because it would have been easy to run, and somebody had to stay and watch the gauge climb, so there'd be a number to show people afterward. A fact too stubborn to argue with. I stood at the pylon with my hand on the cold iron, and I watched the green light spread out under the dock, slow and patient, the way a stain spreads through cloth, and I logged the time. 12:41. The water came up another hand while I stood there. The light brightened, and small shapes began surfacing near the pilings. Translucent, ribboned things, the size of a man's forearm, drifting upward in loose drifts, like leaves rising instead of falling. They didn't seem to want anything. They simply rose, glowing, indifferent, and wherever they touched the iron supports the metal hissed and went the color of rust overnight. I sent the alarm myself, the old mechanical one. The crank siren bolted to the gauge house that hadn't sounded since Dorner's storm. I cranked it for as long as my arm would let me, and people came out onto the dock rail to see what madness had possessed the new gauge keeper, and then they saw the green water and they stopped asking. Soon arrived at a flat run, which I had never seen a surveyor do, robes hiked and slot eyes wide, and looked first at the water and then at my log, open on the rail where I'd left it. 12 entries in pencil, 11 marks on a 100-year pylon, and a 12th climbing past all of them in real time, while the instruments back in the clerk's office still claimed nothing was wrong. Evacuate the lower dock, I told him. I didn't shout it. There wasn't time to shout, and shouting wouldn't have moved the water any slower. Get the children off the south rail. Now. He looked at the glowing things rising past the pilings, at the metal going to rust under their touch, and for the first time since I'd known him, his calm cracked clean through. He gave the order in his own tongue, fast and short, and the dock workers moved like they'd been waiting their whole lives for permission to be afraid. We got the south rail clear with maybe 90 seconds to spare before the ribboned things reached the shallows where the children had been fishing an hour before. The fuel barges we couldn't save. 3 of them went down to rust and bare ribs within the hour, eaten through from the waterline up, and the harbor stank of brine and hot metal for 2 days after. Nobody died. I want that said plainly too, because it's the only mercy in the thing, and I've learned not to take mercy for granted twice. Afterward, when the water dropped back below even Dorner's old marks, and the green light faded to nothing, like a held breath finally let out, Osun came and stood beside the pylon with me. He looked a long while at the 11 old marks and the one fresh cut above them. The 12th, which I'd made myself with Dorner's own knife once the danger had passed, because the gauge still needed keeping, and the count still needed to go on. Your instrument, he said slowly, is more honest than ours. It's not the instrument, I said. It's the marks. Somebody has to be the one who writes down what's true, even when nobody wants it to be. He didn't have an answer for that, not a surveyor kind of answer, with numbers and projections behind it. He just looked at the 12th mark a while longer, then at the rusted ribs of the barges cooling in the shallows, and walked back up toward the clerk's office to recalibrate every instrument his caste owned. It took them 3 days to admit, in their own official channels, that the gauge had been right and their instruments had not. They never used the word wrong. Surveyors don't, not about themselves. They used a longer word that meant the same thing if you turned it over enough times, and posted a new protocol on the board, requiring a human gauge keeper's log to be checked alongside their own readings before any tide table went up again. I read the notice once and didn't say anything about it to anyone. Some victories don't need announcing. They just need the next mark cut clean and true when the time comes. I still keep the gauge. There are 12 marks on the pylon now, and I have already told the next keeper, a quiet woman from the second shift, what Dorner told me, that the marks don't lie, even on the clearest morning, even when everyone with a measuring instrument insists they must. You just have to be the one willing to stand at the iron and write the number down.